All right. Welcome, guys. We are a little remote today, so I am at home, and I had a little work from home day. Had a lunch that I went to. Our my church and my pastor runs a leadership luncheon that actually stopped prior to COVID, and then we they just picked it back up, so I was able to attend that today, and it's really neat. Their big premise is just when leaders get better, everybody gets better, and so I had an opportunity to go do that today, and got a chance actually to do that with a fellow gym owner, and then Bill from MileFit came with us today. So anyway, so I'm working from the home office. It serves as partly a spare bedroom, and then there's the bar and the I'm going to play some air hockey during the podcast. I think my headphone thing almost rebounds. So welcome coaches. We are on our 10 general physical skills series again today. And we've been hashing this out. We went through our first four, and our first four that we discussed were cardiorespiratory endurance, strength, flexibility, and I've got one in there, stamina as well. And all of those are training or physiological adaptation type skills, right? Of our 10 general physical skills. The last four, there's like we're going to split in the middle here, but the next four that we're going to talk about, balance and coordination, agility and accuracy, those are neurological adaptations. So those happen through practice, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But balance and coordination is what we're going to focus on today. When we circle all back, that's only 8 of them, right? So then when we circle all back, we're going to talk then about speed and power, which are the expression of physiological adaptations and neurological adaptations. And so there's a method to why we're approaching this order. And so today, talking about balance and coordination, I think I would start out by maybe just talking about, I have a client currently in their 70s, and they have worked through some injuries and some surgeries and that. And we were talking the other day about getting down on the floor, and they can't currently without some level of assistance from something that they can lean on, grab, or whatever else. And they're like, well, as long as I have that, I can do this. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but what happens when you don't have that? What happens when you don't have that and you're on the ground? What happens when you don't have that and you're coming up and you need to get down to the ground, or you wind up on the ground? And they're like, well, I just won't do that. And as Bill from MileFit was like walking by at the time, and he said, gravity is undefeated, right? And when I think about balance and coordination, I think about our body's ability to stay upright and in control through body movement. There are 2 different ways of that, static and dynamic, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But then also coordination, so the body's ability to move multiple joints at once, under control, smoothly and efficiently. And so balance and coordination matter in everything that we do. But really what we're going to talk about is a little bit of why it matters. Obviously, we can all probably understand why it matters in sports. We might touch on that a little bit, but then why it matters like to the general population and who we are. So, Sam, as we think about balance and coordination, what's the first things that come to mind for you when we think about those neurological adaptations?
This is our ability to kind of move towards simply. It's something I talk a lot about our coaches. I don't know if we've ever really talked about it in here. It's the difference between if we're going to moving from point A to point B and simply calling that success. Like let's just take like the barbell clean, where we go from the ground to our shoulders, and ideally one fluid movement. One, coordination is your ability to make that fluid. But like the lack of balance and coordination just means that we get it there. Your balance and coordination is what now allows us to move it more optimally and efficiently. This allows us to have at that point a greater expression of strength, or power or whatever it is. Like it enables us to truly express and access everything we've got. But also with that efficiency, we do we create more our movement. Sorry, I'm gonna get there. Our movement becomes far more what our body would like. Like it's more joint friendly. So a lack of coordination and a lack of balance puts a lot of extra stress on the system, on the hardware. It's a neurological adaptation with very physical benefits or pros and cons. So like a lack of means that we're probably going to be putting a lot more stress on it. Like somebody that walks poorly, maybe they've had a knee issue for a long time and it's messed with how they walk. They've lost balance and coordination in their gait, and now every step now is that much more stressful to each joint involved. So by developing this system simply allows us to live a more pain-free life in a sense, and allows us to express what we're capable of.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there when we talk about the moving the body efficiently. And we talk about mechanics and technique a lot with our clients, and we're kind of sticklers on why it's so important to move well through exercise, which involves a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? If someone lacks strength, well, then they may not lack the strength, or they may lack the strength to maintain position, right? And one of the things that we talk about in balance, especially, is our body's ability to maintain postural stability through movement, right? And so if someone lacks strength, that could be an indicator of that, right? If someone lacks the ability to maintain the right movement pattern, right? So whether that's coordination or whatever else, like you hit on, like moving efficiently, moving smoothly, definitely factors into the stress it puts on the joints or doesn't put on the joints, right? So activating muscle fibers correctly, going through what we call an appropriate neurological pathway or developing those pathways appropriately, all of that affects the stress to the areas of the body. So from an injury prevention standpoint, that's huge. But I also think from a performance standpoint, right? I always talk to people, I think a common term, especially when it comes to the Olympic lifts, is like slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? And that idea of like really being deliberate around movement and coordinating the movements effectively allows us actually to move quickly, okay, and more efficiently. And so, I always like those workouts that have a power clean in them, and especially if it's going to be a power clean under fatigue, because I feel really good about my mechanics of that movement, because of the longevity that I have in doing that movement. So under duress, I can still maintain efficient movement patterns, which keeps me actually moving the bar faster over time, right? So when somebody believes in this idea, like, well, I just need to grip it and rip it. Well, that's not always the case. And that not having the appropriate balance and coordination on your feet, coordination of your body, moving multiple joints at once, which is an indicator of so much of what we do, right? Very seldom are we doing single joint exercises. Matters a big deal. Yeah, for sure.
And the other
Coach
piece
Millie,
of that,
what's that?
I said, and another piece to that is that if you're just gripping, ripping, you're trying to just be an A to B lifter. The actual adaptation that we're trying to achieve from that clean does not happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like just because the bar moved to your shoulder doesn't mean we got the benefits of doing a clean. Mm-hmm. Something happened with it, but again, we talk about the neurological pathways, the skills that we're trying to develop, the strength we're trying, the strength gain and power, the power increase that we're trying to elicit does not happen when we are out of order, uncoordinated, and unbalanced.
Yeah. Coach Millie, as you think about balance and coordination, what comes to mind for you? What have you noticed in your training, either working with others, working on your own personal fitness? What have you noticed when it comes to balance and coordination for you?
For me, when I hear those two terms, I know I always go back to postpartum or pregnancy, but
Yeah, but we want that perspective. Like
that's my
that's the beauty of this.
jam, so to speak. But because, during pregnancy and then, immediately postpartum until you retrain it, you've basically lost your connection with your core. And that's huge for balance and coordination. And your joints are weird and loosey goosey, and your nothing feels the same. So just retraining. Honestly, when I hear those terms, that's what I think of initially. And then retraining that brain muscle connection in order to have appropriate core connection, which translates to that balance and coordination for your entire body. But postpartum training, you have to retrain your brain to talk to a certain muscle group because it's been disconnected for so long. And that a lot of that is that balance and coordination comes into play there.
And that just comes back really fast and easy, right?
Yeah, super simple.
Yes. So if you are in that boat and it's taking you a long time, it just does take a long time.
Yeah. And you are, and especially because, I've been breastfeeding for a year and your joints are weird, and my coordination and my balance is not what it was before. I feel sometimes I'm like, is it just me that am I aging?
You are.
I am. But it's, I've twisted my ankle walking upstairs or downstairs just because all of a sudden I lose my balance out of the blue because my joints weren't, they're just weird right now because of just the hormones. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, you make a good point when it comes to the postpartum, because I think a lot of people believe like, oh, well, I'm done having the baby, so I'm good now. I'm like moving forward. But whether we breastfeed longer, whether all of those things still affect our hormone release, and that hormone release changes the laxity in our joints, the laxity in our ligaments. It's intentional. It's supposed to happen. It's part of the process. But in addition to that, think about your center of gravity and how your body has stabilized and mobilized for 9 months as you've grown your anterior portion of your body to support a baby. And then now a squat is a different squat, a hinge is a different hinge, a putting something overhead, a press overhead, or a carry is a different thing based on how your body's center of gravity is also adjusted. And so your body has developed certain neurological pathways to support that. And now you lose that, it's gone. And now you have to then retrain and re-educate. So that makes total sense there. And I think that's why I think that takes me to kind of my next page is like, when we think about balance and coordination, agility, accuracy, we think about agility. I think when we talk about that, a lot of clients could hear that term, but they think about it from an athletic standpoint. We'll talk a little bit about what that is and isn't when we get there into that episode. But when we think about balance and coordination, I think we have a lot of clients that look at this and they might even listen to this episode and be like, well, this doesn't really apply to me because this is more like as someone gets older, like someone's risking falling. And we'll talk about that a little bit for the older client. But I think this also correlates so much. They don't understand how much this correlates with the new exerciser, right? So the new exerciser, much of their initial improvement in the initial weeks and months of what they're doing is actually neurological adaptation, not true strength development. We're creating strength because we are developing appropriate pathways for the body to do the work. We are developing stamina because we're increasing capacity because now our body knows the pathway to utilize. It has the neurological pathways to utilize so that it can do the movement, so that it can continue on with the firing, so that it can appropriately get into a postural position. And so if you think that balance and coordination doesn't matter as a younger individual, or doesn't matter when you're just doing general fitness and you're in your 30s and you're like, oh, I don't know why I need to work on this. It's because if I don't like, these are done through practice. So if I have never,
skills.
What's that?
Plain and simple, like these are perishable skills. Everything that Josh just described are performance based. These are perishable skills for the long term. So that's why these become an issue as we age.
It's kind of
these skills.
They're not.
Yeah. You dig the well before the drought.
I think about
that. I like that.
I think about the 40-year-old virgin. I think about the 40-year-old virgin, and he says, is it true if you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Okay.
and
There was about 19. I was so ready for where we were going on this. I was
Yeah.
like, all right, we're gonna get an MA rating on this one.
Yeah, it's totally safe, still family friendly. But the idea of if I've never practiced these skills or I've never developed these pathways, when it is needed to turn on, I don't have those pathways developed. So my body doesn't, again, this is accomplished through practice. So if the practice hasn't happened, then nor have the pathways been developed. And so that's where I think there's a big gap there where people
And
don't realize like, what's that?
I can use my dad as an example. He'll probably never watch this, so I'll just throw him under the bus. But
Great. I'm going to send it to him. I'm going to send it
he
to him.
had a serious back injury in
know,
his
Mom.
40s. His back and his ability to walk has continued to go downhill, and he's never developed those senses of balance and coordination, and that is greatly affecting him now in his 60s, and he is seeing a neurologist to hopefully gain some of that back, but without catching it at the beginning and working to improve that, it's gotten steadily worse, and now he has to relearn how to walk and use one of his legs because, again,
I get that.
he didn't learn those things when he should have, and he allowed it to progress past a point that he can just figure it out. So that's a great example of why.
I mean, that's really common though. That's a really common psychology that goes into it. Is because I'm sure your dad for the last 20 years has just blamed the injury.
Mhm.
That time I hurt my back, 20 years later, it's still biting me.
Yep.
But the
Yep.
reality is, yes, there's probably some amount of he was never going to be the same way after you have a baby, your body is never going to be the same. But the injury is not hurting you 20 years later.
Mhm.
Your choices in the last 20 years since then are just as much, if not a stronger influence to the issues he's having now.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's tough. I mean, I understand the whole injury thing.
Mhm.
I understand it coming back from it. That stuff's tough. Like I remember I know how to walk and I can't, and I get my leg and I don't know how to walk.
Right.
And it's nuts. And my brain's lighting up. My leg doesn't know what to do. My hips are confused. Like it was weird. It was really weird. It was like somebody went to the switchboard and moved all the wires around. Right. And this is, and I trained all the way up to my surgery. Like I was in the gym the last day I was allowed to be in the gym, training coordinated movements for that purpose and had been for years, knowing that this might be coming. I got in the gym the second I was allowed to be in the gym again, getting back to coordinated movements before I got my leg back. And then I get my leg and it's like, oh, you want to walk 10 feet? Good luck.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how to do this yet.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I again, I think we've hit the nail on the head so much when it comes to functional fitness and functional movement, and the way that we train our folks is like, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And so many of us we chalk it up to an injury. We chalk it up like, oh, this will never happen or whatever else. And as soon as something occurs like this, we're wondering like, oh, why, Sam's had this occur. I know with his, like, well, how has he been able to bounce back so quickly? Well, it wasn't because of what he's done since. It's because of what he did previously. Like he'd been building the base for years, even though, like he just said, even though everything was different when he got out and was ready to actually start to learn again, he had developed at least a level of a base to be able to build off of, to start. He was never starting from square one because of everything that he had done leading up into that point to set himself up in the best possible position to be able to approach the next phase, right?
And let's not get it twisted. You could be listening to this in your car and find yourself in my situation in the next 13 hours, the next 12 hours. How many times have you been driving down the road, watched another driver and be like, that driver's going to kill someone? This is one of the ways people become amputees. Yep. Another driver not paying attention. It's not their fault, but it happens. And I thought about that a lot in the hospital. Like most people don't get to choose their amputation like I did.
Mhm.
So like the reality is it's another reason why we train it. And then it also speaks to another very common and not even an unfair complaint about CrossFit from somebody who doesn't understand. They always say, well, why do you got to use complicated movements? And for those of you that don't know, I do the programming here, and I am very simplistic in my programming and the movement selections. Don't get me wrong, we do high coordinated movements, but this is wise because we have to develop these systems. And at a certain point, once you have it developed, you have to continue to take the next step to keep the development going. So
Mhm.
this also speaks and answers to a big part of the question and common complaint about CrossFit. Again, so why do you guys use higher skill movements? Because we need to develop these skills,
Because
like
life is
plain and
higher
simple.
skill. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not, again, if I was just if I had trained as an A to B lifter, like I've already described, when I got to my leg, I wouldn't really know I wouldn't have even learned how to develop the skill to walk well. I would have just learned how to not fall over. And that's not the same thing. And that's why a lot of amputees think that the things I'm doing aren't possible. That's why they think that the back pain is just a part of it. Well, I have an amputation, so I have back pain. No, you you had an amputation, your gait, you've not taken the time to develop your gait. And because you've accumulated all those poor steps,
Or reps.
poor reps, like we already talked about, you now put extra stress on all those joints. Don't get me wrong, I am definitely more susceptible to those issues. My left hip will not age as well as my right hip, or maybe it'll go the other way around. You see both in the community, but a lot of it comes down to the refusal or ignoring the fact that this is a skill thing that has to be developed. You don't just get to have it.
Yep. Yeah, you made a good point. And one of the things that as I was kind of looking at my notes is and you said it earlier, is these things are both accomplished or improved through practice, maintained or improved through that. So the other thing too is like we are all aging. My 5-year-old is aging. She's on her like that's just the way it is. We're all aging, and as we age, we have an option. We can degrade, which most of us will. We can maintain, or we can improve. As we start to kind of get over the hump of aging and we start to kind of go down on that, what we would call the decline, there's just a natural and more rapid pace in which we decline, right? Unless we do something to combat it through nutrition, through training, through sleep, through mindset, through, all of the other pieces that we discuss when we talk about
Doing
healthy
maintenance
living.
to a car.
What's that?
We're doing maintenance to a car.
Right.
Perfect
So
maintenance will give you the best performance, but in the end, it's going to end up in a junkyard.
yeah. And so, but like you mentioned, this is a perishable skill. So we do a lot of these things when we're active as kids, but as we age, we become more sedentary. We just, myself included, even though I've trained for a number of years, I've tried to stay competitive for a number of years, I just don't have the same balance and coordination on my legs and hips and ankles and all that stuff as I used to when I was out running around playing sports when I was younger, right? It's just, I don't go through the same movement patterns. I don't hit the same reps like that. Now I have, joints that ache and muscles that are tight and, so, this is a very perishable piece there, but a couple of things I want to hit on from an aging standpoint. And when we think about this is that, obviously as we age, we experience dysfunction, deterioration in the sensory systems. And that's one of the things that people don't, we don't think about all the systems of the body. We have our vestibular system. Okay. We have our visual system. We have our somatosensory system, the cognitive system, and the musculoskeletal system. Well, all of those things mattered because when we think about balance happens with our eyes, our ears, and our body sense, like our body's awareness in space. Our proprioception is one of those pieces there. So there are tendon organs within our body that are trained or developed and learn how to tell where our body's at in space. Well, if we never train those or test those, they're not available to us then when I step off the curb and it was a little bit bigger of a step than what I planned for. And so I start to stumble and I don't have the ability to catch myself as I would have hoped because I don't have the pieces there available to me, right? And so one of the things that happens for our older clients is they have a risk of falling. I've seen this occur honestly with my clients in one way. Like some clients have fallen, but most of my clients have never had a fall that has created an injury or an issue for them. Why? Well, because they've been training with me for 15 years to prevent that and to develop those things to keep them from falling. But the fear of falling still exists because they watch a friend fall. They see a coworker fall. They see a spouse fall, and they have this anxiety level that really, like, they're worried about falling, or they've seen someone else fall and they don't want to break a hip or an ankle or a wrist or a collarbone or something like that. So that stuff is very common. But what I find is in my trained individuals, that exists less because we've built up their confidence in their body's ability to hold its own, to go through its daily activities. And because what happens with that anxiety, what happens with that fear is they just stop doing things. And we talked about this with cardiorespiratory endurance. When we lack cardiorespiratory endurance and stamina, what happens? Our activities of daily living decrease because things are harder to do. Therefore, it's just easier to stay sedentary. And so then what happens? We continue to degrade. We don't continue to maintain or grow or advance, the body. And so no different with balance and coordination. If we feel like we lack coordination or balance, or we actually do, our activities will only decrease because we are fearful of the risk that we're putting our body in, and things are harder to do. And so therefore we become more sedentary. Therefore we increase the speed of the aging process. And now that only degrades our health more. I don't know. That's just been that's been what I've seen with my clients, just because I work with that demographic quite a bit. It wasn't my plan.
I mean, Josh has multiple clients over the age of 70. And most of them he has trained for over a decade, some of them closing in on a decade and a half plus.
Mhm.
So Josh, there is a lot of perspective coming from that right there. And I think the one thing, it's not all the balance and coordination, but the other piece of the puzzle is Josh's athletes, or the clients, however, I don't know how they like to be identified. Some people don't like the athlete term. They're also more resilient when it does happen. I said
Yes.
gravity's undefeated way before Bill did.
Yeah.
But gravity is in fact undefeated. You are gonna fall. Have you built a body and do you have a body of work that's created the resiliency to handle it?
Yep. Yeah, I have seen that. I had a client that this was years ago before I started the gym, but they stepped off a curb, they hit some ice, and they fell. And there was nothing that anybody was going to do to stop that. They broke their pinky. And they broke their pinky because they were able to be aware enough of where they were at in space to minimize damages as best they could. And when they landed and caught themselves, they caught their pinky in an odd way. Like, if I've got to sacrifice a pinky over, well, let's not even talk about my pinky. But if I have a client that has to sacrifice a pinky versus a hip or a knee or a shoulder, I'll take that.
Fall is usually a broken wrist and or elbow. It's usually like forearm, anything from wrist to elbow typically breaks pretty bad in a fall like that. If you don't have that resiliency, kinesthetic awareness, like the whole nine, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So last two things I just want to hit on real quick before we close out here. So, one thing is, one of the largest components and I touched on this earlier, is maintaining or improving your balance and coordination is that the body's ability to challenge its postural control or postural control systems in multiple dimensions. So this is why we train the things we train, right? Coach hit on it early. This is why we train more advanced skills. This is why we pull weights from the floor. This is why we squat. This is why we press. This is why we drag sleds. This is why we slam med balls. This is why we rotate and twist and do all these things, because it's not just developing the postural control to move a 200-pound deadlift. It's to develop postural control so that our body can develop those systems in that plane of motion, in that dimension, so that when I go to brace myself in a different dimension, in a different setting, I have the structure to do so. So if you're someone who's like, how do I improve my balance and coordination? Like, move loads safely, move loads efficiently, move loads in the right technique and position, and you will develop balance and coordination as you move loads. The second thing too is like, you're like, okay, well, I don't really need to worry about this, do I? Like, well, not yet, maybe, but you want to have Coach
How
Millie,
much choice do you want
how
over
did you
your life?
reference that? Dig the
Dig the well before the drought comes.
right, dig
Yeah,
the
like how much
well,
choice
right?
do you want?
Right. And then lastly, the other thing too is, this is one thing that I would highlight in our Legends program. I think some people see some of the stuff our Legends do, and it does look a little different. Well, this is our 55 and older program, so it kind of should, because we actually probably spend a little bit more time on the balance, coordination, and agility pieces for those clients, because they are in a more rapid rate of aging, and they don't get as many touches on these things. But it also helps to improve their memory and their spatial cognition. So like knowing again where their body's at in space, and then also improving like their actual memory. And I mean, all those things are pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the aging process. So if you're someone in your 55 and older range and you're like, I feel like I need to work on these things, you're absolutely right, you do, but you want to do it under appropriate direction to do it safely and effectively. But even working on balance and coordination, can help with the other cognitive pieces of our body and our brain too. So extremely important there. Cool, guys. You know what? I don't have anything else.
I think you put a bow on it.
Mhm.
Balance, coordination. Use
Every
it.
time I
Use
talk, we go for 20 more minutes. So
I get it.
I've got a wife and no kids to get home to.
All right, kids. Well, hey, great spending some time with you guys. And this episode, we've got a few things in line, but not sure what just happened to my speaker. Hopefully, people could still hear me. But yeah, we'll look forward to. We're going to go. Our next episode is going to be on accuracy and agility. Talk a little bit about those pieces. I know Coach Sam's got some good stuff on accuracy and agility there. And we'll talk about, why this matters to our general client, not just, again, when we think about that agility piece, we think about agility ladders and speed and agility stuff. We'll talk about why those components are important. What's that?
I said that ain't it.
That ain't it. That ain't it. So thanks, coaches. Thanks for letting me be remote today, and look forward to talking to you guys next week.
I never got asked.
See you guys.
Bye.